Welcome. I'm Harmony Slater, your host of the Finding Harmony podcast. Over the past 20 years, I've taught thousands of yoga teachers and students to explore the intersection between ancient wisdom and modern everyday life, using mind-body practices to heal, awaken, and manifest their dreams from the inside out. This podcast is a sanctuary for those feeling overwhelmed by life's challenges. Are you ready to jump in and discover how these challenges aren't actually in the way, but are the way to finding harmony? Let's invite the magic back in. Hi, welcome to another transformative episode of the Finding Harmony podcast. I'm so excited because we have a beautiful human, Aimee Echo, here today. She's also an old friend from the Ashtanga Yoga community, and we are talking all about how to explore the power of self-love and awareness from a weight-neutral perspective, and how to transform our relationship with food and our bodies. And so I'm just really excited you're here. This is a deep episode talking about some very sensitive patterns that maybe you might be familiar with or you might yourself have struggled with. I think so many of us struggle with our relationship to food and how we're using food in our life, whether it's for self-soothing or comfort or fun or social, or whether we're trying to avoid it or restrict it. And it seems like this dysfunctional relationship with food shows up in all different types of areas, all different types of organizations or aspects of our life. And sometimes when we come to yoga, we think that it's all about being healthy and eating healthy. But sometimes this obsession with healthy eating, how much, how little we're eating, what we're eating, can itself turn back into this disordered relationship that maybe we came to yoga in the first place to get away from. So we are exploring all of these things, the harmful effects of diet culture, the importance of body love and acceptance, and how to break free from the cycle of guilt and shame surrounding our food and our relationship to food. And Aimee's going to provide us some guidance on how to build a more positive relationship with how we're eating, what we're eating, and how it's impacted her own life, coming to terms with her own food issues and really looking at them from a loving perspective. So I cannot wait to jump into this episode with you and get started. Hi, welcome to the Finding Harmony podcast. I'm your host, Harmony, and I'm here with Russell Case.
Oh, I'm a little nervous, Harmony. I'm a little anxious, actually.
Why?
Well, you know how I have these, boundary issues?
Oh, yeah.
And the person you brought on today, sweetie, is not good for those boundary issues.
We are joined today by the fabulous Aimee Echo.
It's like the fucking filter, just shuts off.
Hello, beautiful. It's been so long since we last connected.
Yeah,
Friend
I don't
of the
remember.
show.
What year was that?
That was the
I think it was 2020.
That was I think you were episode 5.
Yeah, you were one of our first guests ever.
So we were all learning things.
We were. We had to do our episode twice.
Yeah, I remember. We got to talk to you twice.
We had to
do
it. We had to ask you the exact same questions over again because the first episode got so mangled.
Yeah, it was weird. There was a echo.
How bizarre!
How weird!
Bizarre is that?
Yeah, there was an echo. Aimee Echo.
Mm-hmm.
Huh? What's going on there? But so much has happened since 2020, and if people want to hear about your story prior to 2020, they can listen to the past episode.
Oh, yeah. We asked you all about that.
Yeah.
We want to know what's been happening now with you.
I like your whole look. You've got kind of like a Kelly Osbourne look going on. The coloring, the hair, the Army T-shirt. Like I'm feeling it.
I love her.
Yeah.
She's fantastic.
She is fabulous.
I've known her
isn't
since she was a little kid, and she's just the cutest.
What?
Yeah. I'm an honorary Osborne. Did you not know this?
You knew Kelly Osbourne personally since she was a little kid?
Yeah.
See, this is why, like, don't go back to the first episode. We're getting juicy shit right here. How did you know Kelly Osbourne since she was a kid? And
Because I was on the Ozfest when I was a kid.
You just hang out with Ozzy?
Yeah, so basically, well, that's a good story. So
Keep going.
yeah, so in 1998, my first band, Human Waste Project.
Oh, great band.
I know.
I listen to them on YouTube still. Awesome.
Thanks. We got asked to do Ozfest in the UK because we were more popular in the UK than we were in the States. And so the whole family is super hands-on, and they're all there all the time. And so when we were playing, Sharon Osbourne and Kelly, I think, and Aimee, Jack was somewhere else, I think, but they all came over to watch the show. And my mom was there too, and Sharon and my mom did the mom thing because Aimee Osbourne is AIMEE like I am. So, right, yeah. And then my husband, Jamie, he was my boyfriend then. He was like a fresh boyfriend at that point too. He was on Ozfest in the States. And so when we were done in the UK, I went over and toured with him on the US Ozfest. Mm-hmm. And when I showed up, Sharon's like, oh, come with me. Come with me, Aimee.
Oh, that's so sweet.
She took me in the back to get my little credentials. And she said to the man, give her a universal pass and put Aimee Osbourne on it.
Oh, that's amazing.
So I got to have the same credentials as the family.
Whoa.
Which was more credentials than my husband, who was playing at the time. And then at the end of the festival, I got to finally talk to Ozzy. And Sharon's so sweet. She's like, Ozzy, I want to introduce you to my friend Aimee. She's a singer. And Ozzy goes, oh, she's a singer. Oh, I like chick singers. I haven't sang with a chick since Slater. And so... Lita Ford.
Was she in the band?
No, they did a duet. Do you remember?
Okay.
Amazing.
Lita Ford, no. Not,
So anyway,
not
Lita Ford and Ozzy duet. So the next night, Sharon came over and said, do you want to sing Paranoid with Ozzy? Yeah, so I got
Fuck
to...
off.
And then I'm standing there with Kelly, and I was like, Sharon, what if I forget the words? And Kelly's like 12, maybe? And she just goes, just read the teleprompter like Dad does. So there you go. Now you've got child Kelly impersonation, Sharon impersonation, Ozzy impersonation.
Wow. We're not paying you enough for this episode, Aimee. That's incredible.
So fabulous.
And so you got to sing with Ozzy.
Yeah. And I was also...
sang Paranoid with Ozzy Osbourne.
Yeah. I mean, there were a couple other people that ended up coming up on the stage, too. I think Max from Sepultura, some other singing person. I can't remember who. One of the other bands. Gosh. But during that same time, I was really nervous. And so Jack was younger than Kelly, I think. And everybody knew I was really nervous because it was like 20,000 people, by the way. No big deal. And Jack bestowed me with the power of the Sabbath.
What is that?
Yeah.
Like?
What it looked like was this. If you are
shot
listening,
his hands out at you.
If you are listening to this podcast, he shot his hands towards my chest, not my chest, my torso.
Oh, that was to your chest. That's what he did. He took a big hold of your chest.
I'm going to keep that one in my back pocket.
Yeah. And he told me, because he was an Osborne, he could bestow it. And then I was forever, I have the power of the Sabbath still.
I can tell. I've seen your live shows. Amazing. I can tell that you have that because you do. You have something electric.
I have the power of the Sabbath, apparently. Yeah.
I love that. Wow. That's incredible. Wow.
I don't think I've ever told that story. Yeah, there you go. Hey.
Incredible. Wow. That's awesome.
I think I told you once that I held hands with Susie from Susie and the Banshees. Which she was just so foul to the audience and telling them off and being a real bitch. I'd never really seen a punk show before. I didn't know what was going on, but she thought I was cute. She held my hand.
Aww, and because you are cute.
But you have that same kind of electric quality that she had. Like that's the only other person I've seen with that. That's that on stage, I don't give a fuck performance.
Okay, now you got me, Russell. I'll do anything you want.
Who was that girl that peed in someone's mouth recently on a live show? Punk rock girl. You have that quality.
Oh my gosh. Wow. The other quality, the other thing I wanted to get to before we move off of Kelly Osbourne, Kelly recently said in the press that maybe she overdid it with the Ozempic. And
Sharon said that, yeah.
Well, they both did.
No, it was Sharon.
No, because Kelly is also, she said, I think I may have lost too much.
Kelly had bariatric surgery, so she did. I think I'm not sure which one of the surgeries.
So Sharon overdid the Ozempic.
Sharon also had Kelly bariatric surgery in the way back. I'm not sure what year, but way back. And then she was on Piers Morgan talking about Ozempic and that she's to the point where, and I saw part of the interview. And her family was on the interview as well, and they looked really concerned. Because I think she's, she said a couple of different, she made a few comments about it. Diet culture, entertainment culture, especially the entertainment side of diet culture is really brutal. Yeah.
Both of them are so gorgeous. Kelly's,
stunning.
So gorgeous. And lovely and juicy, and they look like you want to just reach out and give them the Sabbath and
empower them.
Empower
them.
Squeeze.
I think they're pretty empowered with the Sabbath.
And
exactly.
And they seem to even embody a kind of body positivity in the way they looked and the way they were just so kind of fresh about not being who they were, and yet even they seemed to be a prey to this culture.
I think I might disagree with the body positivity. They're definitely pro body autonomy, and that's I'm super pro body autonomy. If you want to have cosmetic surgery, bariatric surgery is a little bit different than cosmetic surgery because you're actually let's just go all the way there. You're amputating a perfectly healthy digestive organ.
Right.
And so, if you're into Ayurveda or yoga, and, you're thinking about, Panchamaya, digestion is really a huge, Annamaya, the physical body that you're sitting in is called the food body, So it's what's made of food. So digestion is one of the most important functions that we have. And so to start to make changes to that for appearance is a really dangerous, it's a dangerous path. I mean, I could talk about this all day long.
Well,
That's
good.
why-
We're
well,
going to
that's
talk
why
about it
we're-
all day long.
That's why we're
here,
here
right?
to talk to you today. That's exactly
Yeah.
why.
But it's
Yeah.
interesting you say that because I know Ayurveda has that,
Yeah.
the philosophy that all disease starts with poor digestion, basically.
Absolutely. And, from a Panchamaya perspective, when we're talking about prana, vayu, if we're talking about pranamaya and on the 5 vayus, the functions of the human system from material level, it really rules digestion. Prana vayu is intake, samana vayu is digestion, apana vayu, elimination of what's been digestion, dhyana is circulating the nourishment, udana expressing after that, after the nourishment's been sent around, and then we've got whatever's left over is ama, right? So it's toxic, and this is where. So if there's a fault in the digestion, this is also, has to do with experience as well. So if you have a difficulty in taking an experience or digesting an experience or eliminating or being nourished by, so the toxin, the problematic substance or experience will stay in the system. And so when you start to jack literal digestion, which is also what Ozempic does. It really, that's primarily what it's doing at the doses that they're prescribing it for weight loss, is jacking your digestive system. It's delaying gastric emptying. And a lot of people are having difficulties with gastroparesis, where the motility, the natural function of food moving or nourish, whatever. At what point is it no longer food? Where food is
Nutrients.
moving, and also waste.
I've
waste.
never heard that question before. It's like a profound question. When is food no longer food, and when is it waste?
Yeah,
It never occurred to me to
after
ask that
samana,
question or consider
right?
it.
Yeah.
Hopefully, and so the motility. If that's going, you got a different kind of problem again. And so we're talking about ama, if we're talking about it from an Indian perspective. So Ozempic can be problematic. A lot of people are having a lot of benefit with it for lowering A1C, but it's
is
a
that?
different for
sugar.
diabetes, for blood sugar.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But that's a different dose. It's a lower dose, and it stays parked. And for the weight loss benefit, they're graduating the dose up and up.
So, just as a FYI, my brother, I don't know if I should, my brother, mom, and stepfather are all on it for diabetes.
Yeah.
Is that is Mounjaro and Ozempic the same?
So there's Rybelsus, Ozempic, and I think those two are prescribed for diabetes and A1C, lowering the A1C, blood sugar management. I guess that's the way you would call it. And when it's prescribed for weight loss, there's a few different drugs. There's Mounjaro. There's a new one that came out called Zepbound. Who names these things,
That
right?
sounds-
Wegovy is the one that's on the same company as Ozempic. So
sounds
Ozempic
like
is
too
the
crunchy
diabetes
granola
drug,
for
and
me.
Wegovy is the weight loss version from the same company, Novo Nordisk.
Yeah.
That was not a plug. So I'm pro medication. I don't believe in stigmatizing medication. I think that that's something that happens in our world too, in our wellness world, where folks get really, I forget, do we cuss here?
Yeah.
Did
Where
we
folks, where people get shit on for, they're stigmatized heavy for taking antidepressants, thyroid medication, these kind
We're
of
going
things.
to lose
Right.
followers for this show, for sure.
What? Because
we're
I'm saying
not.
don't stigmatize medication?
Yeah, there's
So,
a Venn diagram between the Trumpist and the yoga teacher, and it has to do with the vaccine.
But it meets at the bottom of the little squiggle of the Q. Sorry. Yeah, we're going to lose some.
Oh, we're going to lose some followers. Yeah.
No, but it is
Yeah.
true. I mean, we do stigmatize all kinds of things when people
Yeah.
want to maybe like use progesterone during
Yeah.
menopause, or
HRT,
need to
for
take
sure.
thyroid medication, or
Yep.
like we're saying, use some kind of medication for managing blood sugar.
Yep.
Or I mean, there's a lot of
Ibuprofen, for Christ's sakes.
yeah, ibuprofen, right. There's a lot of shame culture around,
Yeah.
needing any kind of support outside of like your yoga practice, I guess,
Right.
or
Yeah.
like your personal health routine.
I had a lot of shame around my ibuprofen use. Extensive.
We can talk about that too. I mean, there were some people that I knew that injured themselves taking ibuprofen so they could do difficult asanas that were beyond the scope of their pain threshold, I guess we should say.
You can
Their
put
body
me in
was
that basket with the people that you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was thinking of somebody who actually ended up hospitalized with kidney issues because they were daily drivers of the ibuprofen.
Yeah. So it was.
And-
I had a friend who died of vascular disease.
I'm so sorry.
Was an intensive ibuprofen user.
Yeah.
And I just stopped it cold turkey.
Yeah, so my point in saying, I don't stigmatize medication is that, I'm all for body autonomy. However, I think people should know, just like Sharon was saying, this started with Sharon Osbourne saying, I've gone too far with the Ozempic. She actually said, I don't think it should be prescribed to children because, she used the term addictive, which is super interesting because this is something, most people think that food is addictive. Are we of that camp?
I don't know. That's a great question. Is food addictive?
I think it's
Some foods are addictive.
It's delicious. If that's what you mean?
Yeah. They haven't proven that food is addictive. There's no study that says that food is an addictive substance, and one of the reasons why is because you can habituate to it. So if I said, if you leave somebody in a room with heroin, they'll likely increase if that's what's happening. If it's an addictive substance for them and they've been doing heroin, they will continue to do it and their dosage will go up.
Right.
If I left you in a room with just cookies and said, that's your meal for the next 6 weeks, you would come out and you'd never want another one of whatever those cookies were.
Right.
Right?
I would also make sure I didn't eat them
regulate.
all. I wouldn't eat them all the first day.
Yeah.
You could have as many as you want. You're sitting on as many cookies as you want.
Oh, fuck
Right?
that.
See, that's what I'm saying. So this is where this gets into this thing. And what is addictive is restriction.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, now we're talking.
Yeah.
Because it's what restriction promises the thin ideal, right? And what comes with it, the social capital that comes with looking a certain way in our culture. The idea that you might be healthy. This is another one of those funny things, right? It's like thin is almost always equated with health.
Yeah.
And
true.
fat is almost always equated with ill health or not healthy. And that's also being debunked these days when they're talking about BMI, which is not my favorite thing to talk about because it's not a very useful measuring tool. So there's categories in the BMI chart.
Yeah.
There's underweight, there's normal weight, there's overweight, there's obese, and then I don't know if they're calling it morbidly obese anymore or what they're calling it. There's been recent studies showing that people have the best health markers in the overweight category. The second best health markers are normal and obese, and then the worst are super obese or morbidly obese and underweight. So it's interesting.
That's very interesting.
I did do a BMI study with Yoga Journal, and the guy who was setting up the equipment for me was telling me he said, well, you do know that, he told me that my body fat was 10%, and I was insulted, and I slapped him. And he said, hey, calm down. 10% is
low.
It is
low,
but it's also, if you go below 10%, then you start getting issues with your immune system, and this is the problem with professional athletes, is that their body fat is so low that they start getting sick more of the time because that fat keeps you healthy.
And then
it
in
blew
a lot
my
of
mind. I was like,
Yeah.
I still feel, too fat. But
in a lot of well, that's the culture. That's the water we swim in, my darling. In female athletes, you start to lose reproductive function, and or in other folks that have conditions where they're undernourished or malnourished. And that goes back to that system of digestion, right? Because in the Ayurvedic model, the reproductive tissues are last in the chain. So if there's a fault anywhere down the line, you lose reproductive function. So that means up the chain is not nourished or digesting properly when you're having issues in the reproductive.
I've also lost reproductive function.
I don't think you ever had it though. So
I don't think I
if you
ever
never
had
it, then you can't lose
But
it.
I may have had it once.
Never had it, Russell.
And then I did this yoga for so long with these sweaty shorts, and I, had the
don't think
tightest,
so.
shorts, and I was like, I feel like I lost it.
But I'd like to talk to you. I'd like to ask you a
Yeah.
little bit of maybe a personal question. I don't know. Maybe an
Yeah.
observation. Wherever you want to go with it.
My parents are both fertile. I don't understand.
No. But like this yoga culture.
Yeah.
And I mean, we can talk specifically about the Ashtanga culture because that's the type
Yeah.
of yoga you teach, the type of yoga that we all practice and we all met each other in.
Yeah.
So let's just talk about that culture because that's sort of what we're
So-
familiar with. Yeah.
We didn't really get into this too much because I wasn't really in I didn't have as full of an understanding as I do now about what was going on with myself for decades and decades and decades, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the suffering that I was going through. But like, to be brutally honest, I came to Ashtanga yoga. I didn't know the difference between Ashtanga and any other yoga. But I came to yoga as a way of trying to control my body and to try to control the way I looked. I wanted another, like working out compulsively exercise wasn't doing it for me. I couldn't get to a weight that was low enough,
From
and
compulsive exercise?
yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't actually work sometimes.
So the deal is your body is your body.
Yeah.
And there's kind of a natural weight that your body will fall at. And not everybody is thin. Some people are curvy, Some people are tall and lean, like my husband. And some people have booties and boobies like me, And so I couldn't ever be as thin as I wanted because of the shape of my body. So I started doing yoga initially I thought it was going to be the answer. It was another it was like gambling again. It's like, this is going to be the one that's going to make me win. And what happened on day one was this really transcendent experience where I got total relief from myself, my mind. And so then I was like hooked, and it was still this culture where disordered eating patterns were praised, fostered, taught, and like using your body in extreme ways was what we did. And it was like under the guise of devotion. You're like rocking your body this way. Don't feed it. It's like a gremlin. Don't feed it after a certain hour or before a certain hour.
5 p.m.
Right?
Don't feed your body after
Don't
5 p.m.
feed it. Only feed it these things. These are the acceptable ones,
Yeah.
And, God. And, then it was like, well, don't eat this. And then don't eat that. Because if you eat that, then, well, so-and-so's not eating such and such, and check out how bendy they are. And, it was like, this is coming out of the diet, that's coming out of the diet. Soon it's just everything, nothing's even cooked anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, or you're just having milk and ghee. That's always a good option.
I mean, there was a time
Rasam packets.
there was times where I was living on coconut water only when I was
Yeah.
cruising around in India. And like, I was it was a huge misperception that I was caring for myself.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't even a guise per se, as it was the culture. It was what we were all doing. And the harder you could go and on the least amount of fuel, the more elite you were and the more praised you were.
Yeah.
So rock and roll.
I love that you're bringing this up because I feel like I went from a ballet culture that was very much the same, right? How much...
Except for add cigarettes.
Yeah, how much... Exactly. How much can you push your physical self with like minimal calories, caffeine, and cigarettes, nicotine, right? I mean, that's...
God, can you imagine if like nicotine gums started going around the shelves? Because they wouldn't smoke.
Ooh,
Right.
nicotine gum. That's all I do is nicotine.
And then what was interesting was when I came to yoga, I came because I think I was very stressed out in university.
Yeah.
And had that same experience of just like feeling really clean, really clear, like that full sattvic kind of experience. And like, wow, this is incredible. I'm finally free. And so initially I wasn't really into it for the physical aspect in a way. Like I was using my body again, which felt good because I had kind of not been using it when I was in school. I was just fully immersed in studying. And so it felt like it was bringing more balance, like some somatic connection back into my life with all of this mental connection. You know, speaking of the 5 koshas, you know, we tend to kind of like abandon one sometimes in order to develop the other.
Yeah.
So it felt like it was a much more holistic experience, and then tapping into this energy body, this prana, right, is incredible. You're like, whoa, this is amazing. Yeah. And then you start making healthier choices for yourself, and you're like, yeah, but maybe you're like, I mean, still, I was still doing the caffeine and occasional cigarettes. So then I started having green juices and like,
stop smoking.
You know, stop smoking and like, started to, really
arguably healthier.
Do healthier things for myself, like love myself and treat myself really, really well.
Absolutely.
But then something else happened after that, which I think is what you're speaking to, is that then the deeper I got into this culture of Ashtanga yoga, it once again turned into, you have to be skinny in order to be able to do these postures, which fucking hell, I will argue with anyone, that is the fucking truth. Okay? When you are skinny,
so helpful.
You can do those postures so much easier than if you are not.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very helpful.
So there's pressure to lose weight.
Yep.
Right? And
also... I don't know how to say his last name too, because I've only seen it written down, but Gregor Maeli, I don't know.
Yeah.
So he, in one of his books, I think it's his primary series, it's these things like, there's little things that like, they leave a crease in my brain that I can't iron out. And it said, if this posture is difficult for you, eat less and exercise more.
Right?
He wrote that down?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it said...
It's obvious, and
I
we
think
all
he
say
said,
it to each other, say it to
due to
ourselves.
adipose tissue. If this posture is difficult for you due to adipose tissue, eat less and exercise fat.
You have a little extra fat.
Adipose tissue?
Adipose tissue is
Is that
fat.
an Australian term, adipose?
I mean, even as a teacher, you know, people are like, why can't I get Supta Karmasana? Why can't I get Marichyasana D? And you're like, well, maybe you should try going on a cleanse.
Oh, that's what you say. See, that's the hidden coded language that we use.
Right?
You should try a cleanse, which equates to a 2-week starvation diet.
I mean, that's what happened in, God bless Kimberly and Noah. But I was like, what do I do? Because I was like, and this was like way early on. And they're like, well, maybe, actually, I can't remember how it happened, but I ended up on a Rise and Shine cleanse. I probably shouldn't talk about these things because it's
What's a rise and shine cleanse?
Well, that's the thing. If I talk about it, then somebody will end up doing it, and then I'll feel guilty.
Oh yeah. But people listen.
But
to
anyway,
the show
it was a
and
really
they go and do
restrictive.
cocaine
It was
also.
they're going to go do cocaine. They're going to do all the things. But really, it was like, okay. And then what happened was, so it was a digestive cleanse, and it was really limited. No salt even. So you were just like leaning out because the liquid, everything's going through it.
Like no salt, no sugar, no grains.
No salt, no sugar, no grains. It was all veggies. It was raw. You could eat like cooked quinoa 3 times a week or something like that.
Right.
And then the last part of it was completely juice, like for a couple weeks.
Right.
And it was
A juice fast. Yeah.
yeah, so it was prep to a juice fast, and it was long, and it worked.
I could do Karmasana, no problem. Find those.
No problem.
I remember
Twist easily. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I had heard about an extreme diet, and it was, I've been living off of wheatgrass and smoothies for years, and raw food, and it didn't seem extreme.
No.
But I remember when Russell Kai was just drinking juice during the week and having a meal on the Saturday, that I thought, oh, that's crazy. Should I be doing that?
Right.
Like, maybe I should be doing that.
So, and that's what was happening with many of us, and is still happening with a lot of us. Is that we're all it's klesha. You're using the tools of yoga through the lens of misperception is what's happening, and so it's like you're starting to abuse yourself all over again.
Yeah.
It's just using, anything you can, klesha, you can use anything for klesha. It could be the best intentions. And it ends up in the same place, which is suffering.
Yeah.
And so.
And like you say, it's reinforced in the culture because I'm going to just come right out and say it. The yoga diet is not a healthy diet.
Yeah, no, it's not. Well, it depends on who you're talking to and what you're talking about.
But so as prescribed in the sutra that we're constantly fed, 1 meal a day is a yogi, 2 meals a day is a bogi, 3 meals a day is a dead man or rogi or something. I don't know.
Rogi would be disease.
Yeah, disease, right? If you want to be a yogi, you should only eat once a day.
Yeah, and then if you go into Hatha Yoga Pradipika, it's like live on milk sugar
ghee.
Water.
Yeah, milk and ghee.
And sweets.
Sweet. Jaggery.
And that was said to our faces. You drink 1 liter of milk per day, and like, wow, that's a lot of milk. Okay, I'm a vegan. I'm a raw foodist vegan. I'm from New York. Like, what?
Yeah, so there's so many different ways, and I don't know who's saying what, or the way so later on, when I studied Hatha Yoga Pradipika, I was informed that it was retreat yoga, not householder yoga, right? At the ashram. Retreat yoga, you do it a couple months a year, and then you go and you live your life with your people and your children and your work, and you have to have enough sustenance to get through your day, and your practice styles back to a way that just supports balance. And we do all these things. It's like you go for the big push, you realize some things, and then chop wood, carry water. I guess that's what they say. Do laundry, whatever you want to.
It's just 40 days.
However you want to put it. Yeah, and so it's like this way that this extreme viewpoint becomes what's suitable for everybody, or what's expected of everybody, not suitable. What's expected, what's passed down as this is the way.
Yeah.
And I think some things were lost in translation, personally. Yeah, and so
like sucking mercury up your urethra might be a mistranslation of Hatha Yoga.
It was the suck word that did my head in. I was cool with mercury and urethra.
But like I had some friends who had made the transition from water to milk, and were doing that. I knew a couple guys actually.
The Tantra yoga practices.
And then like Khetri Mudra and stuff like that. Like
and then Noah told me, and then there's this one guy who's really special who's moved on to Mercury. It's like, he's really doing the Mercury? He said, yeah, he's doing the Mercury. I was like, that's cool.
But so like, cool.
But you're mentioning like, the cutting the tongue
dude, if you want to have like a break from your identity, do that.
Right? Yeah.
Permanent break from your identity.
Permanent breaks, man. That's so punk. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're doing this very punk modernist exercise of throwing all of the bathwater out with the baby, and then we're going to rebuild it by hand.
And look, there is at the end of the day, Krishnamacharya was teaching householder yoga. Mm-hmm. And so this piece of Ashtanga is super useful, but it needs to be prescribed correctly for the person that's in front of you, to what their life is and to what their purpose is, and to help them find what their purpose is. Yeah. And part of that, for me, this relationship between mind and body it feels like where everything gets off track. Mm-hmm. That's like klesha number one for me. So klesha, just for those who are not Russell and Harmony, because you guys are so aware of all of these
of the Sanskrit terminology.
And
we
Yoga
sat
Sutras.
In class with you.
Yeah, I know, that's where we met, in class. But klesha being a foundation of action that's going to cause you suffering, and it's usually rooted in misperception. It is rooted in misperception. That's the field for all the others. Yeah. And so there's a way that we get it wrong fundamentally, and it starts with that rule of like, are we a guardian of this thing that we sit in? Or are we a taskmaster? Are we a driver? Are we an abuser? So like, what is our role? And I think that piece is like the first step in correcting a disordered way of behaving with food in your body. Because if you can start to step back and go, okay, and it's really difficult. The pattern of most folks is not guardian or caretaker for their human system. It's just not. Yeah. And mind gets all in the way that mind does, and it's trying to keep you safe. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, so safe is really, really thin, and everybody else is drinking green juice and snorting mercury up their urethras. So I want to belong with the tribe, Yeah. So from an evolutionary standpoint, doing what's right or useful isn't always the choice we make. It's belonging, because that equals survival.
Yeah. I think even at the time, I was self-aware enough to know, and I was saying to other people, like, there's real money on the table with each posture we get. There's an equivalence. And I'd said that to folks that I knew, is like, if I can get another posture, I can make more money than other people.
The cynic.
Well, are the realist, but like, if I could get through third, I was going to make more money. I was aware of it, and that's what I was pushing for. And then that all leads to all of these destructive behaviors that are all tied up in competition.
That's klesha, right? So it's like,
much.
if asana is supposed to be this tool that shows us that we can have some agency over what's happening in our body, our food body, human system. And then the pranayama is showing us that we can have agency over something more subtle, right? So then this is this path that we're taking, right? We're moving from outside to inside. We're taking the relationships with others, or our relationship with our mind, we could say, with yama, and then the way that we care for the system with niyama. And then, okay, now I have this body. How does it work? So I'm practicing operating it as if it's in balance, and then changing it, right? So I'm practicing operating it as if it's in balance, and then changing it, right? So I'm practicing operating it as if it's in balance, and then changing it, right? So I'm practicing operating it as if it's in balance, and then changing it, right? So I'm practicing operating it as if it's in balance, and then changing it, right? So I'm practicing operating it as if it's in balance, and then changing it, right? So I'm practicing operating it as if it's in balance, and then changing it, right? So I'm practicing operating it as if it's in balance, and then changing it, right? So I'm practicing operating it as if it's in balance, and then changing it, right? So I'm practicing operating it as if it's in balance, and then changing it, right? So I'm practicing operating it as if it's in balance, and then changing it, right? So I'm practicing operating it as if it's in balance, and then changing it, right? So I'm practicing operating it as if it's in balance, and then changing it, right? So I'm practicing operating it as if it's in balance, and then changing it, right? So I'm practicing operating challenging it a little bit more, so that it can keep it in balance when these insane things happen, because they do in the world. And then doing the same with the breath, like, oh, this is something that's automatic. I have agency over it. And then the sense organs, this is something that's automatic. I can have agency over that. That shows you that you can have agency over the most subtle, which is the mind, right? Instead of letting the mind go, keep her safe, 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 and making these huge errors that not eating food and compulsive exercising are safe.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, all of this is really an anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the human, it's the human, I heard somebody refer to it as a psychological immune system. And it's just mind trying to keep you safe from injury, psychological injury. And so that's where a lot of these issues are stemming. And a lot of us, I'm going to include you guys in it because we seem to be on the same ride here, made some perceptual errors and got pretty extreme and did some totally fun and radical and amazing things, had great times, and did some things that weren't in care of the human system.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you a little bit about this too, because I think this is an interesting distinction that people don't necessarily make, because it's subtle and it's difficult to make this distinction, especially when you're in it.
Yeah.
But like, I had an eating disorder, and I recovered from my eating disorder, but I still had disordered eating.
Yes.
And maybe you can talk a little bit about that distinction, like what makes disordered eating, what makes it that you still have a dysfunctional relationship to how you're feeding yourself.
So I'm going to go back to Yoga Sutras and say klesha, right?
Yeah.
So the whole game of the first part of chapter 2 in the Yoga Sutras is the global actions of yoga that we're taking to bring ourselves back to balance so that we can come out of suffering. And klesha being the thing that is the cause of the suffering, so that big misperception. And what it says is, we take these 3 actions, we make efforts to heal and change patterns that have caused us suffering before by paying attention to what we're doing and why we're doing it. And if it's not aligning, if it's based in misperception, if we can see that we've hit suffering before, if it's going back down that track, we stop it in its track and we try a different thing. And we have to have some conviction that that new way will keep us out of the suffering. And so we're klesha seeking all the time, right? When we're doing yoga, hopefully, if somebody has taught us this, otherwise we're klesha growing, right?
Yeah,
so
reenacting.
Yeah. And so the second sutra, it says the whole purpose of these actions of yoga is to make the klesha small. And then to make...
people can think of klesha as just like a pattern, like an unconscious pattern.
It's a pattern that leads to suffering. That's it. It's a pattern that leads to suffering because somewhere you missed the point, right? So the eating disorder was a misperception about... So there's a lady called Gwyneth Olwen, and she wrote the homeodynamic recovery method, which is one of the ways, it's one of the evidence-based ways to come out of anorexia and other eating disorders too, I guess. And she defines an eating disorder as the misidentification of food as a threat. And so
I think I still might have that.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. And so what yoga says is that klesha doesn't go away.
Yeah.
It gets smaller.
Yeah.
It can be small. It can be interrupted. Yeah. It can be raging, or it can be dormant. But it's always there.
Oh, like a fat
And so,
cell.
What?
Like a fat cell.
Wow. Ooh. So if we've conquered that klesha, the misperception, the misidentification, we'll just go with Gwyneth Olwen's definition.
Yeah.
The misidentification of food as a threat, which, I mean, if that's your definition, how many disordered eaters do you know?
Right? Like everyone.
Yeah, right? So if we've got that as our base definition, and we've made it small, dormant maybe, When stress comes up, this is what the Yoga Sutra says too, when the chit hits the fan, right? That's a good
Chit.
I love that.
Oh, that's
a
amazing.
Tim Miller quote.
When the chitta hits the fan. That's a fan fucking fantastic.
So
Whose quote was that?
Tim Miller. Go
That's
Tim Miller.
awesome.
I love you.
Wow.
So when it gets real, which it does because we're human, right? Klesha gets activated. Yeah. And if food is what was your trauma, that's what's going to happen. So I'll give you for example. This is way TMI. I don't know why I'm saying this. I was going to the gynecologist the other day. I had a lot of anxiety about gynecology. I don't like people putting things in my hoo-ha.
Yeah, okay.
I could probably phrase that in a different way.
Which was unfortunate.
But I was driving and I was super stressed out and I was like complaining about the traffic and I was driving and I was like, I got to drive all the way up to LA to see this doctor, And the doc, really what's going on is I'm in total avoidance of this. And all of a sudden, the last weigh-in that I had at Kaiser popped into my head. And I started it was in kgs. And so I started converting kgs, 2.2 times And I was driving and counting and numbers and I went, fuck. Oh, you're anxious.
Right.
Okay, let's take care of you. And I started breathing and I stopped counting. And so, but you have to see it. Yeah. And if it's been disguised as health and everybody's doing it and it's what you're supposed to be doing to be accepted, safe, right?
Yeah.
That's really, really hard to see. I mean, it took me until 4 years ago to get the whole picture of it. Again, it was just how do I fix this? How do I fix that? How do I fix it? I had given up restrictive eating for the most part, but I was still having like counting, food thoughts, weighing, like all of the stuff was there. So this is what you're saying. When you can't, you've healed, recovered, you're in remission, right?
Yeah.
We've put the eating disorder dormant.
Yeah.
But you still have disordered eating. So I had all these little things going on. And it wasn't until I met this lady, it was a really cool series of events actually that happened, but I ended up finding this person, Isabel Foxen-Duke, and she's a pretty renowned, I don't even know what you would call her, I guess she's a weight neutral coach.
Can you say her name one more time?
Isabel Foxen-Duke. What a great name.
Yeah, it's great.
Right?
I looked at her website this morning. She seems really cool.
Yeah, she's an interesting person, but she had this perspective that was completely different. And I'd never, she said to me, addiction is not the problem, restriction is. And I went, oh my God, how many times have I gone back to restricting?
Yeah.
I never had a problem. It wasn't the food that was the problem. I wasn't a binger in the way that folks say binge. Like I ate normal sized meals, things like that, whatever that means, right? I didn't eat to the point of painful fullness. I wasn't eating like what one classify as a binge, which is, I classify it different now that I met Isabel. But let me tell you, there wasn't a moment that I wasn't thinking of like, okay, how can I lose weight? How can I lose weight? How can I get to the weight? How can I meet the weight? How can I get smaller? How can I be lighter? And for whatever reason, like that never stopped, So that was the addiction. What's the next thing? I tried all of them. I did everything. Yeah. And when I get anxious now, if I'm not listening, mine's like, oh, just do that. Just it goes right to the, oh, you're not going to have the bread. You're just going to have the, you're not going to have sugar. You're not going to, it starts to restrict. So for me, when she told me that I wasn't a food addict, that I was a restriction addict, and it was confusing to me because I can't make anorexia weight.
Yeah. I can't either, and I tried really, really fucking hard.
This is what really sealed it for me, Harmony, is she said, I said, I can't make anorexia weight. And she said, well, hardly anybody can.
Right.
She's like, it's called atypical anorexia. And I went, what? That's a thing? And she said, and it should be reversed.
Yeah.
Because the people who can actually, whose bodies are biologically capable of becoming unhealthy weight, underweight, is like 2 to 3%.
Right.
So you're not going to meet the BMI, but you have all of the behaviors.
Yeah.
They should call it typical anorexia when you don't meet weight.
Yeah.
And they should call that when you need to be hospitalized, atypical anorexia.
Speaking of which, have you ever seen those Karen Carpenter videos of her drumming?
She's the most amazing drummer.
She's so talented. Not only can she hit atypical anorexia, but also what a fucking amazing singer and drummer.
She's also an atypical drummer.
She was one of the best drummers of the 70s.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen these videos, she's, wow.
My mom
makes weight.
My mom worked at the hospital she died at. It was a...
Whoa!
Yeah, I'm
you
not
are
laughing.
so full of stories.
Yeah, and it was...
Oh my goodness.
It was like a big... Obviously, it's a big deal. You know, people weren't talking about anorexia like that then.
No, they were just talking about, like, time signatures.
Well, but really, anorexia came more into the forefront later. Let's just say the 90s when
The 90s, yeah.
when I had to be a musician and then wanted to, hit a weight, So but that was the click for me. Mm-hmm. It was, because I thought I had all of this mental suffering. It was taking up so much of my time and energy and leaving me without energy. And it was that click that was like, oh, no, you're addicted to restriction. You're anorexic. Mm-hmm. That's addiction to restriction is anorexia. You're anorexic. Your body is so functional that it just drops your metabolism every single time you hit famine.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't know that you're self-famining.
Right.
You and I share a very similar genetic disposition.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget when I got certified in Mysore, I had this beautiful young woman come up to me who, just in passing by, we were having a conversation as you do, and I was there with my young son at the time. And she said, I just really wanted to say I'm so happy that someone with your body type got certified.
Oh my God.
And I was like, oh, well, thank you. And meanwhile, stab me with a fucking knife because I'm trying so hard to be
not
thin.
to have this body type. I know. Yeah.
God damn.
And
That's insane.
And the thing is that
she's also trying to be nice.
I know. She
she's
sincerely meant it because she also felt it. She also felt like, she said, I don't mean that in a negative way, but I also have a similar body type, and I find it very difficult to achieve advanced asanas. And it's just amazing that you did,
Well, there's also, we can be frank in saying that there's a huge percentage of the small percentage of anorexics that are super successful at asana in our little world. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so for you to be super successful at asana and not look sickly.
Yeah.
Because to be fair, you're a very small person.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
But what I'm saying, in the grand scheme of what humans look like, you're a thin person.
Exactly. Yeah.
I remember, I don't know if I should say that he said this, but one of our dear friends said, this is the only room that I feel fat and not flexible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And so
you remember Jim Ruffin?
Yeah, I love him.
He said that to me all the time. This is the only room I feel fat in.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there, we have, when were certified Harmony, you were very thin, and I think that you still are. I haven't seen you in person in so long.
I've put on a few pounds since then.
Me too, and I like it. So I do have to say that, you know, the other piece of this is there's like a little bit of, and we're kind of all over the map, and that's okay. There's a little piece of this that one of the huge facets of my healing, one of the things that helped me change my seeing, just like literally when you're talking about yoga being freedom of seeing, in this one pocket, I understand what freedom of seeing means. And one of the big things that really helped was I had curated thin bodies in my viewfinder for my entire life. I had put them on my refrigerator. I had curated bodies that didn't look like mine and my body would never, there's no, like, I could not eat for months and I would still not look like that. I'm not that shape. It's just not what my body is. And I started looking at bodies that were bigger than mine and my size. And all of a sudden there was almost a phobia, I would say, that was part of the disorder. That is, if I look at it, I'll become it. And that's a really fat phobic and super fucked up perspective. And so it was really freeing to let go of that ugly piece of fear. Because there's so much beauty in larger bodies across the board. And so I started curating diverse bodies, all sizes, all shapes, all heights, all curves, all no curves. So I just started like on the regular looking at diverse bodies, all sizes really, but I had, you know, because I'd been creating smaller bodies for so long, I had to make a real effort to every day to see bodies that were larger. And it's been amazing. It's been amazing, you know, to be able to appreciate my body for what it is. And this is something that comes up a lot. You know, there's this idea of loving your body. And it's like when you've curated a body that is valuable, that isn't yours, and yours will never be, you might not love the way your body looks.
Like ever.
Like ever, really. I mean, you can. I can tell you I've come a long way. But I had totally curated a different body that if I didn't meet that, it wasn't worthy, right? And so I had to let go of the idea in order to find some comfort and some peace. I had to let go of the idea of loving what I looked like and starting to actively love her, care for her as a verb. And, you know, so I am leading a program now called the Yoga of Food and Body Respect. And we're going to be going into our second round coming in January 28th. And one of my students in the last round asked that question. She's like, when am I going to love my body? And I'm like, it might not happen. But you can work towards it, and that is one of the best ways to start changing your perspective is to look and find beauty in all size bodies.
Yeah, I love that. I love that as an actionable step people can take.
Yeah,
and I also one thing that helped me a lot, I think, as far as like loving your body, is I noticed when you're just focused on appearance, it's harder to love your body because there's always something visually that you're like not liking, right? And it could be anything. It could be absolutely anything. But when you think about your body as a whole, as something that's as a vehicle, as like something, you know, I love that I can walk. I love that I can move. I love that I can breathe. I love that my body's healthy. I love that I'm strong. I love that I'm flexible. And you start to see how your body's actually so functional. all of a sudden it like infuses you with a different understanding of your body, that it's not like something outside of yourself, that it actually is yourself. And I think that kind of switch from seeing yourself as an object versus like seeing yourself as a whole integrative being with all these koshas, right? Healthy.
One of the role switches that Isabel would talk about. She was the first person that I heard say it, and it was so profound. She's literally your blood.
Yeah.
She's your family in the truest sense of the word. Yeah. And like without her, you can't be with him. You can't see your child. You can't, it's like the most valuable relationship that you have. It's literally your blood. Like it doesn't get any deeper. And to treat her, we treat our blood like that too. Our families, there's a lot of dysfunction that we're all working through, right? But if we're looking at love as a verb, would you ever do that to your child?
Yeah. Right.
Of course not. It's like, oh, you're not cute enough. Let's not give you, or your dog.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Let's cut your stomach in half. Let's give you some Ozempic shots. Let's do this. I should rephrase it. Wegovy shots, because Ozempic is a functional diabetes medication that has a side effect of weight loss.
Yeah.
So there's that perspective, of really stepping into a new relationship with your body. And then once that is set as the foundation of the actions that you take, right? If we're talking about klesha as a foundation for an action that's rooted in misperception, if we can start to think of our human systems as something that we're in the care of, it's, I love the idea of guardian. Like, I'm going to fiercely guard her now. I'm not going to let that happen to her ever again. It's super emotional. I mean, it was like years and years of self-abuse. And I wouldn't do that to anybody else.
Right.
I wouldn't do it to anybody else.
Yeah.
Nobody. So.
And I love that shift too of like, it's how we interface with others. Like, it's how we love others. It's how we communicate. It's how we, right? And when you start to attribute all of these, like everything that your body's doing for you, which is like immense.
Everything.
We can't even like list it in this podcast. Or, it'd take us forever.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden there's so much more love and respect and honor and you do want to take care of yourself, and you do want to guard yourself, and you are like, you know what, it's not about numbers or like, an extra roll of fat cells in my stomach or larger thighs than that body over there. Like, you just stop this weird comparison thing that the mind gets into when it's only looking at a shape, right?
Yeah. It's really fun to look at it through the lens of the Yoga Sutras too. Like, I have a blast. It's just like, I'm just having the best time. Because that was really when I met Isabel, everything she was saying, I'm like, oh, that's Yoga Sutra. I'd be like, oh, you're saying da, 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 da. And I'm like, oh, it's all there. And then it was just like, oh, okay, now this makes sense.
And what's really powerful, I think, about your program that you're talking about is, this philosophy of yoga. In many ways, I think it has been kind of taken and manipulated in a very object kind of centered way, right? Where it's like, I'm going to say kind of like a masculine hierarchical sort of way where we're projecting onto it all these old structures and systems and hierarchies and, right and wrong and good and bad. And it sounds like to me you're looking at it as more of like a holistic, maybe more feminine, more kind of taking the philosophy and applying it to like being present and loving rather than like taking our old patterns and seeing how they fit into the philosophy in a way.
And So I was just thinking back to 1 meal a yogi, 2 meals a bogey, and I think it's 2:17 in chapter 2 when it talks about the why of coming into this vehicle. It's boga is one of the whys. Yeah. It's so that we can realize ourselves. You know, so it's like without the if you're in denial of the human experience,
the pleasure, the enjoyment,
you're gonna miss seeing who you really are. There's a fine line there, you know. You have to get.
But it's I mean, I think that's so beautiful about yoga is it's balance, right? Like if there's no, and I've said this to so many students, if there's no joy, there's no yoga.
Absolutely.
So
that's the pleasure is a biological imperative.
Yeah.
We will not stay alive if we do not have some joy. It really is true. It really is true.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and it's a both and, you know, this is like, how do we really use the yoga tools if we're in guardianship?
Yeah. I love that. And it sounds like you're helping people to break some of these old patterns and habits of thinking.
There's so much unlearning. Yeah. Like that's the hardest part, I think, is like, but I heard sugar is addictive, but I heard you're not supposed to eat gluten, but I heard you're not supposed to have this many meals. And I heard keto, I heard, you know, vegan, I heard that.
And it's very confusing.
This whole eat more chapatis things is sort of counter to the whole ideology. You should be eating more chapatis.
Yeah, eat more chapati. Well, he said eat more chapatis, didn't he?
He did.
It depends who he's talking to. Sometimes it's eat more, sometimes it's eat less.
Eat less.
You know, I think one time I remember...
He told me piles and piles of rolling fat.
Piles and piles of rolling fat.
Piles and piles of rolling fat.
Oh
he was thinner. He used to be thinner, but now piles and piles of rolling fat.
Piles and piles of rolling fat.
Huh.
You know, there are a lot of folks for whom fat is no longer a negative word.
Maybe it was a compliment. I hadn't even thought about that.
So fat is a wonderful endocrine organ that serves a purpose, especially when you go through a hormonal transition like perimenopause to menopause.
How is that going for you?
It's a ride. No, it's a legit ride. Like, I think that actually was part of the recognizing that I had to get a new coping mechanism for anxiety, because like the actual physical anxiety that comes with the estrogen decline is legit. Like I had crazy, there was like 8 days where I didn't sleep. I would wake with a startle from heart palpitations from changing hormones. So like it was super intense. It was like as if somebody was going to crash the car and I was just sleeping in my bed. And it was like, it was to the point where I couldn't function. And that's when I started looking at HRT. And I went on and I went off again because it was, I haven't found I'm in an okay sweet spot right now. And then I'm going to the doctor on Thursday and I might talk about it again. Because, there's a lot, you know, but I think for me, it was like the increased anxiety on a physical level. It was super funny. I went to the doctor and she's like, I'm describing what's happening. And she's like, it sounds like a panic attack. I'm like, no, everything's good. She's like, no, but what you're describing sounds like a panic attack. And I'm like, oh, is that a panic attack? And she's like, yeah, that's a panic attack. And then I started to freak out because I'm like, I'm having panic attacks. And then there literally was like this marked increase in anxiety. And luckily, and I had food off board and restriction off board. So I just had to feel it and do some practice about it. You know? So I was like, okay, let's go do some asana and breathe.
So
and
funny.
to be fair, if you're using the tools without klesha as the foundation, asana is amazing, pranayama is amazing, yoga is brilliant. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, the tools of yoga, because it's not yoga at that point, right? The tools of yoga can be harmful.
Yeah.
So,
I love that idea that the yoga itself is like a technology or a tool, and it can be wielded or used.
Just like everything else.
Negative ways.
Yeah. Just like everything else.
Yeah. Exactly. Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much.
I had so much fun.
You are a friend of the show, and you are such a font of wisdom and knowledge. We would love to have you back on.
I'll come on anytime. We can tell stories. We can talk sutras. We can do fun things.
I'm sure there are
we can eat brownies.
We can eat brownies.
Other people that you can talk about and tell us more things about.
Maybe.
Tell everyone where they can find you and your beautiful program.
Super easy. You can just go, there's a shortcut, Aimee, Aimee, Echo, ECHO, AimeeEcho.com leads to my school website. And then you can take Mysore classes with me, or you can do individual one-on-one yoga therapy, which includes food and body stuff if you want to work that way. And then I have this yoga, food, and body respect program that's coming up that's going to be on Zoom. So everybody from anywhere can attend. And it's on Sunday. It's going to be Sundays at 11 a.m. Pacific. So that makes it open for folks in Europe if they're feeling really frisky. So I know it's on everybody's family day, but whatever. That's when it is. It is.
I've learned there's no winning with days.
Yeah.
And weekends seem to be the days when most people are available. So,
So it's in there in that website, and it's 8 weeks. It's more of an introduction and just a reframe, and there's a lot of philosophy. It goes across the board. My hope is that people leave with some anxiety reducing coping mechanisms that are not maladaptive. So we do a little bit of asana, we do some pranayama, we do some swadhyaya, some meditation, and then we talk a lot about philosophy and some like ways of seeing that are different than diet culture.
Perfect.
I'll find a way to maladapt it, don't worry.
Russ is going to sign up right now.
Right now. Yeah, so that's one way to find it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. And we'll have all the links in the show notes so people can
It's so fun to be with you guys.
It's so fun to have you.
Well, thanks for listening. I hope that you're leaving this conversation feeling really inspired and recognizing that the Yoga Sutras and yoga philosophy and all of this deeper yogic wisdom can be applied to so many different areas of life. One of them being our relationship to ourselves, our body, and how we're feeding ourselves and our food. And that yoga itself can be used as a tool that will help us and help our conscious spiritual evolution. But it can also be used in a way that's just reinforcing these kleshas or these negative patterns that are creating obstacles or harm in our lives. And that all of this comes from a misunderstanding. It's an innocent misunderstanding, but a misunderstanding nonetheless, that we aren't whole and complete, and that we have to change ourselves to be enough, or to be liked, or to fit in, or to be better than something that we already are. And so really embracing our wholeness and our completeness, and really cultivating some deep, compassionate self-love, self-forgiveness is really an important practice, maybe the most important practice that we can do as human beings on this planet. You can find all the information about Aimee's upcoming program in the show notes below, and I also have a wonderful freebie for you. So if you would like to take control of any feelings of anxiety, or you notice that your mind is racing and you immediately want to bring it under your control in a way that feels holistic and healing, then I would encourage you to download my 2-minute free breathwork practice. It's an audio guide, and it will guide you through a very simple breathing break that you can implement throughout your day that will optimize your energy, that will help you to reset some of those patterns that might be driving an addiction cycle or a klesha, a negative sort of tendency that you easily fall into. It can just create that moment of pause in your day that really helps us to reset and to re-engage with the world in a more positive, conscious way. So head on over to my website, harmonyslater.com. You will find the link right there for the 2-minute breathwork audio, and I would love for you to download it and use it liberally to really help you create a clear slate at different periods throughout your day so that you're engaging with life in the most compassionate way you can, in a place with full awareness and full consciousness, and creating new habits and new patterns that are healing and helpful to your mind, body, and your spirit. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Finding Harmony podcast. If you're finding value in this podcast, a cost-free way to support us is by subscribing and leaving an up to 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It does mean the world to us. Your feedback not only supports us, but it helps others find the path to harmony. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Finding Harmony Podcasts for even more inspiration, and join our community at harmonyslater.com. Thank you again for being here. I cannot wait to share with you more in the next episode. And until then, keep embracing your journey to both inner and outer harmony.